Okay, this is some supporting material for the first tutorial. Quite often students want to run the development environment we're going to look at on their own laptops or their own desktop machines at home. Getting the environment set up can be a little bit tricky, so this is just some extra notes on the side if you do want to try and get the environment we're going to be using running on your own hardware. So this isn't a part of the tutorial per se, but just some supporting information. I'll talk about it in the tutorial, but there's some extra information here. There's some social bookmarks you can find at Pinboard, and the URLs in SHU-Space. And these slides I'll put on SHU-Space as well, but they're really more of an aid-memoir for me as I'm going through this screencast than a resource. But they'll be in there as well, just in case you want to look at them. I'll talk in the tutorial about the components we're going to pull together here, but if you follow the PhoneGap Getting Started guide, we need 4 components in essence: the Eclipse Integrated Development Environment, the Android SDK, the ADT plugin for Eclipse, and PhoneGap itself. So I'll describe all of these components in the tutorial properly. This is more about getting them running on your own hardware. So to get things up and running, the first thing we need to do is to download and unpack Eclipse. So eclipse.org is where we go for that. You can click on the download link, and you want Eclipse Classic. You can see here it's detected my operating system and it's given me a choice of architecture 32 or 64-bit. It'll detect your operating system and give you the appropriate choices. Make sure you choose the right architecture for your machine. As it happens, I've already downloaded my Eclipse just so that I don't keep you waiting. I'm going to make a directory called IMA where I'm going to put the files just to keep them all tidy and together. And because the Eclipse download is a tar.gz, I use tar to extract them. Tar minus extract verbose file, and then where I've downloaded it to. So that unpacks Eclipse, and we'll leave that at that for now. We're going to run it in a little while, but we don't need to do it just yet. Step 2 is to download and unpack the Android SDK itself. So developer.android.com/SDK, you can click on the download link, choose your architecture, and then you'll download it. As it happens, I've already downloaded it. It's like Blue Peter, isn't it? So what we do with that, I'm going to unpack that in my home directory. The Android SDK is sensitive to where it gets installed, so I'm going to put it in my home directory. It's a zip file, is that right? It is, yeah. So we unzip. So that's just unpacked the SDK. And then we need to do 2 things. As I said, the Android SDK is kind of sensitive to where you install it. And the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we can access all the components. So if I cd into this ADT directory, which is what's been created by unpacking the SDK, I go into the SDK directory and I can go into Tools. You'll see in here a lot of executables. The Android SDK needs to be able to access these executables from wherever it happens to be running, which means we need to add this directory to our path. I've chosen to add this to my bashrc file. Obviously, you might have different variants on OS X, and Windows has its own variants. I'll try and do a different screencast of the different OSs. So this is the Unix-like one, if you like. So here's our bashrc. And you can see I've actually already added these to the file. I'm exporting my path there, I'm setting it to the original path, but then adding as well SDK platform tools and SDK tools. So that's what's going to make all the Android executables available from anywhere in the shell. And what this means is I can do things like run Android. So I run this for the first time, and you can see here's the Android SDK manager starting up. It's downloading information about the current Android SDK and pulling the files it needs down. So that's good. We'll just stop that briefly. So we've done the path modification, and obviously when we're running Eclipse, Eclipse needs to be able to run those Android commands, which is why we're adding them to the path. The second thing we're going to do is to create a new virtual device with Android AVD. So I rerun Android, but this time I put AVD on the end. This gives me the Android Virtual Device Manager. And what I'll do is, if I move this to the workspace down, because we're going to need to keep this around. Virtual devices, again, I'll talk about in the tutorial, but it's a way of running a phone inside your computer. We're going to create a new device here. We'll call it Test1, and we'll make a new Galaxy Nexus. Okay, it's telling us what work it's done. We can power this phone on now, so I'll click Start. I'm not going to. You can make the display appear on screen a real size, so it's phone sized, but I'm not going to do that. It'll make it a little bit bigger and easier for us to see. So you can see here the phone starting up. I don't want to send usage statistics to Google, really. This is the equivalent of actually switching on a phone. So it's going to take just a minute for it to sort of boot up and configure itself. So what I'll do is pause the video while it's starting, just so you don't have to sit around watching a blank screen. Okay, so that's just taken a minute, and you can see we've got a phone on screen now. This is essentially a real phone. Obviously it's not connected to a mobile network, so you can't make calls through it, but it'll run applications. We can wire it through to things like our webcam to give the camera, and it's basically an environment for developing and testing applications without having to use a real device. So this is the first time the phone started up. It's giving me a few instructions. I'll click on the OK button there. I can click on the apps here. And I should be able to swipe as well. Yeah, there we go, that's me swiping. Can use the back button to go back. So there's our phone. I'm going to leave that running because it'll be useful for us in a little while. So we've done the second part. We've created a virtual device. Next up is the ADT plugin for Eclipse. Let's leave that running. Go to the directory where we unplugged Eclipse, unpacked Eclipse, sorry, and we can see there's the Eclipse executable, so we'll run that. It asks us to confirm our workspace. I'm going to say don't ask me that again and use it as the default. So Eclipse is a modular integrated development environment, and people write plugins for it, and the way that you install plugins in Eclipse is by pointing it at a website where it can find information about plugins and then download them. If we go briefly back to the PhoneGap documentation, we'll see this bit that says download and install ADT plugin. Let's look at that page. There's a link to installing the Eclipse plugin. The thing we really need here is this URL. So I'm going to grab that. I go back to Eclipse. Let's make that full screen, shall we? And I say help, install new software. Click on add, and it's going to be the ADT plugin is the name I want to use, and then I paste the URL I've just grabbed from that page. Eclipse goes away to that site and it says, oh, I found two plugins there, the developer tools, which is what we absolutely need, and the native development plugins. I'm going to grab those as well. Click on next. Eclipse visits the site, finds all the dependencies for the components we've asked it to install, says this is what I'm about to do. I say yes, I want to do that, I accept the license. Eclipse then goes away and downloads those files. So if you want to have a go at this, you can probably pause the video whilst you figure this out and then come back. Eclipse is warning me that some of the content that I'm downloading is unsigned, but that's okay, I trust the site that's sending it to me. We're now told that Eclipse needs to restart, so we can say yes. The first time Eclipse restarts, it tells us that the location of the Android SDK hasn't been set up, so we can click on Open Preferences, and it's asking us for the SDK location. We click on Browse and we go back to our home directory, which is where we unpacked the Android SDK. That's the directory, ADT bundle. Click on the SDK, oops, wrong one, SDK, and that's the location of the SDK. So we click on that and then we can say OK. Okay, I'm going to go with that. I think that's okay. I clicked on Accept License there and install. It's downloading the bits and pieces it needs. Okay, so we've installed the ADT plugin. In the tutorial I'll talk about what PhoneGap is. Hopefully you'll be looking at this after that. So by now you know that PhoneGap is a HTML5 application development environment, which means that what we're going to be editing are usually web pages, in essence HTML files, and JavaScript files. The default Eclipse that we've installed doesn't come with editors for those particular file types, so while we're here we'll go on Install New Software, click on All Available Sites. Eclipse is now visiting all the sites where it can download plugins and seeing what's available. If we scroll all the way to the bottom, there's this Web XML, Java EE and OSGI Enterprise Development. Expand that tab. And while we're in this list, let's grab Eclipse XML editors and tools, because we might have to edit some web services later on if we're talking to a server. We're going to have web page editor, and the other thing we want is JavaScript development tools, because we're going to need to edit JavaScript files as well. So there's XML editors, JavaScript editors, and a HTML editor as well, just because it'll make our life a little easier later on. Repeat the process. Don't worry about accepting the licenses. These are all open source license components, so there's no need to worry. Nobody will turn up demanding money from you. Again, we have to restart Eclipse for those changes to take effect. Okay, so that's Eclipse nailed, and the ADT plugin. So the last thing we have to do is to get PhoneGap itself installed. There it is, phonegap.com. Click on download and it'll download it. As it happens, I've already downloaded it. I'm going to unpack it in my IMA directory. So there it is, phonegap260.zip. It's a zip file, so I'll type unzip. Downloads PhoneGap. There we go. Oh, if I could spell unzip, that would help. So that's unpacked PhoneGap, and that's all there is to do to install PhoneGap. There's no installer to run, we just unpack it. If I go into the PhoneGap directory, you'll see there's a doc and a lib directory. Go into lib. You can see all the different platforms that PhoneGap supports. So we've got Android, here we've got BlackBerry, Windows phones, iOS obviously, and there's our Android. So we'll go into Android. All the files that are dependent, and then a bin directory, and you can see a few scripts. So in the tutorial I will talk about the way that modern web and mobile development platforms basically orchestrate lots of subcommands to give you easy to use scripts, and two of the easy to use scripts we've got here are create and update. So we've basically installed all the components we're going to need for this course. We've probably got to convince ourselves that they're really working though. So here I am in my PhoneGap lib Android bin directory, and there's this create script. So why don't we create a little hello world application? I'll run create, and it comes back immediately and tells me that create command needs 3 parameters: a path, a package, and an activity. So create. Well, path is the path to the directory we want created, where we want this project forming, basically. So I'm going to create that in home, ACSII, IMA, which is the folder I created for these things, and let's call it Hello World, I guess. We need a package. So packages are ways of organizing your code into related chunks that are intended to make it easy to reuse that code in different environments. So package naming often follows domain naming conventions, so let's give it a university-like name, uk.ac.shu. and this is integrated mobile applications .hello world. And the last thing we need to give it is an activity. So the way that these applications organize themselves are by activities. So an activity is answering your phone or sending a text message. So we're going to create an activity called, say, hello. Okay, that's everything we need to create our. So the create script has come back now, and it's not really told us anything useful. If we have a look in this directory, you'll see it's created a load of files for us, and this is basically an Eclipse file, Eclipse project rather. You can see there's a build.xml and there's a local.properties and a project properties. So what we're going to need to do is to open this in Eclipse. So we go to our Eclipse install and we say File, New, Project. Click on the Android, or expand the Android list, Android project from existing code. So the PhoneGap create command has created an Eclipse Android project for us. It's going to ask us for the directory where we can find this project. Obviously it's IMA Hello World. Okay, and it's all filled in defaults. That looks good. We've got the finish button highlighted, so we can click on that. Okay, and let's say we want to go back to the workbench. So here's our Say Hello project. We've got our source directory. So we've got one source file in there, sayhello.java. Doesn't do a great deal. The important thing with PhoneGap, and again this is stuff for the tutorial proper really, is here's our www folder, and we've got an index.html. Because we installed that HTML editing component, you see we get nice syntax highlighting and a few other nice things. Here's our main.js, our JavaScript file, which again has syntax highlighting because we install those extra modules. Otherwise we just see grey text here. Good, that's our application. I'm going to right click on it and say run as Android application. Okay, that has not worked. Let's have a quick look. I expected, oh, there we go, sorry, I should have been more patient. This pop-up has come from Eclipse and it said no compatible targets were found. Do you wish to add a new Android virtual device? Yes, I do. And there's the one that's already running. This is this device. I click on OK. I think I can close that down. Okay, so this is trying to connect to the phone application. I'm going to close that down actually. Oh, sorry. Sorry, that was a little bit confusing. Here's our application. So what's happened is it's been deployed to this phone. Sorry, that was a little confusing, wasn't it? I wasn't quite sure what was happening myself. I click on applications. We can see this Say Hello, which is the name of our activity. If I just grab that, I'm going to put it on my phone desktop, and then I can click on it. Okay, and I get this Apache Cordova device is ready. If I go back to my code here, in index.html, you'll see here we've got device is ready, blink, and then connecting to device followed by device is ready. So this is using a bit of JavaScript to turn off this paragraph text connecting to device and turn this one on, device is ready. So you can see by running the application we've got some HTML out, and there's our application running. So a little bit confused because I'd left this device running from before, but you can see how things fit together end to end. If I shut down this device now and restart everything, it'll be a little bit cleaner. But hopefully you've got an idea of how to get this sort of thing working on your own your own Linux boxes at home. I'll do an iOS one and a Windows one as well for all the different platforms. Or you can just email me or ask me questions in the tutorial if you're having problems with it. Okay, cheers.